I wonder if we might start with the case of the missing Princess Latifa. What is the British government's position on this?
Well, look, you can only watch the footage that you've just shown, Niall, and see that there's very distressing pictures, a very difficult case, and I think it is concerning. We always raise human rights issues with all of our partners, including the UAE. There's no particular British locus in this case, but we are concerned by this. And I noticed that, and we've seen that the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights will be following up on what we've seen, and we'll be watching and monitoring that very closely indeed.
From what you're saying, it certainly feels like we would not be in a position, as yet at least, to talk about sanctions, to talk about perhaps inviting the ambassador in for a chat.
We always raise these issues with all of our partners across the piece, including in the Middle East, where we have to have some of these difficult conversations. I've always raised human rights issues. I always do, with foreign ministers, with the ambassadors. And I think the right thing, given what the United Nations has said, is to follow very closely. And we're obviously always supportive of the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights. And I think that's the proper course right now, to follow those developments quite closely.
Of course, we do have a relatively close relationship with the United Arab Emirates. There is trade, of course. There are security concerns. One understands that this issue is not going to immediately change the nature of our relationship. But one has to say, given the fact we had a UK court ruling back in 2019 that not just the princess has been abducted, her sister as well, Sheikh Samsa, was kidnapped on British soil. I mean, on the basis that at least one of his children looks to have been kidnapped here, don't we have more of a responsibility to get involved?
Well, certainly in terms of the private law claim that went through the UK courts, obviously we not only respect but would expect compliance with any and everything that it's decided, to the extent we can control that, of course. And any criminal matters rightly for the police, and they should investigate them without fear or favour.
Would you, Mr. Raab, support seeing some kind of proof of life of Princess Latifa from UAE?
I think, given what we've just seen, I think people would just at a human level want to see that she's alive and well. Of course, I think that's a natural instinct, and we would certainly welcome that.
I wonder if we might move on to the announcement that you're making today, and of course the UK and its role on the Security Council. There are opportunities for us to push a number of agendas. Tell us just a little bit, though, about the ceasefires in conflict zones. I mean, certainly we need to get the world vaccinated for the world to get back to normal, and that clearly will have to involve areas in which there is conflict. How would that work, though?
So the UK is stepping up to the plate. We've got the presidency of the UN Security Council, and you're right, there's two things we're particularly focused on. The first is trying to get a COVID vaccine ceasefire, because with the new vaccines, which is a big change since last year when this resolution was pushed by the French with our support, we got an opportunity to get to some of the most vulnerable around the world. And one of the things that I've seen as Foreign Secretary is the compound impact abroad in the most vulnerable countries for the most vulnerable people of three things: famine, conflict, and COVID. And so if we can, through the UN Security Council, which is the international community's top body for passing rules and making statements around international law and what's required, if we can just see a window of opportunity to reach those really vulnerable people in those terribly afflicted countries, I think we'll be doing a lot of good. And that's what Global Britain's all about, and that's what we're going to be trying to secure, on top of the support for the equitable distribution of vaccines, which are already leading the way in terms of the COVAX AMC mechanism. We've provided £500 million. That will produce 1 billion doses, again, for some of the most vulnerable people around the world. There's the two things we want out of this debate later on today, which I'll be chairing.
Indeed. Of course, we are ahead of much of the rest of the world, not just in getting the vaccination into people, but in terms of the purchasing of the vaccine. We had a considerable degree of foresight when it came to hedging our bets, such as it was, in terms of who we ordered from. We've clearly got, on order at very least, more vaccine than we could ever use. At what point do we start to think seriously about redistributing that? I mean, we heard from the Vaccines Minister at the weekend, potentially not until every adult in the UK has had a vaccine?
So first of all, we're already trying to support those most vulnerable countries, the low and middle income countries around the world. And the right way that the international community can respond, and which we're leading on, is the COVAX AMC mechanism, because you put money in, it secures the doses. The COVAX AMC arrangement has supply chains with the different vaccine suppliers. So that's the first thing. It's the most important thing. It is going to be the clarion call that I make in the UN Security Council later today. It's true as well, if we've got excess supply in due course, when we know not just the amount of vaccines we need, but the timing, we would then want to think again whether there's an additional route of support that we might be able to provide. We're not there yet, but we're already stepping up to the plate in the way I described, by putting money in and using our convening power to get other countries to match it. And that's the way we'll support the most vulnerable countries, the most vulnerable people around the world, and show that we need a global solution to a global pandemic.
It is slightly away from your brief, but I'm sure it's something that you know about. The letters that will be being sent out to around about, well, just less than 2 million people, telling them that they need to shield. It all seems the product of this algorithm that is driving at least part of our pandemic response. Can you just explain exactly why we have found ourselves in this situation, what the metrics that this algorithm has identified are, and how soon we might think we can be in contact with these 2 million people?
So obviously we want to make sure our response to the pandemic is updated as we learn more about the virus and also about the vaccines. Oxford, and it's called the Q-COVID program, has, through data that it has modelled, found that there is a particular additional vulnerability in relation to certain compound factors. So it's things like age, sex, body mass index, all put together. And it's 1.7 million who we think are at greater risk. About half of those will already have had the vaccine or are on course to have the vaccine under the current rollout. So there'll be another around, again, half of that number who we're contacting to say, first of all, you're now a priority for the vaccine. We want to make sure they get it as soon as possible. And secondly, we're urging them to and advising them to safeguard until the end of March, with all of the support on things like statutory sick pay, guaranteed delivery of supermarket and medicines that will come with that. I think it's the right thing, the responsible thing to do, to make sure when we learn about people who are more vulnerable to the virus, that we do everything we can to provide them extra support. That's the approach, and we will be notifying them immediately as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they will be grateful when they're contacted. But just in terms of how we come out of this phase of COVID-19, there seems to be a very strong indication that, well, of course, you have always maintained testing and tracing is at the heart of getting us out of this. But it feels like we are about to embark upon a programme of mass testing around the country to try and keep on top of this as the vaccine continues to be rolled out. Can you just speak a little about that?
We learned previously in places like Liverpool and other areas in the north, the value, particularly when you've got a spike, of testing done at scale and at pace, particularly with the new lateral flow testing. But as we roll out the vaccine and as we start to think, and the PM will set out the roadmap forward on Monday, so on the 22nd of February, and he'll set out the details. And as we get the feedback, the data from the impact of the vaccine, the two or three things that are going to be really important if we're to ease out of lockdown safely and responsibly are, yes, of course, the vaccine, the therapeutics, which aren't much talked about, but the drugs that help take some of the fatalities out of those that contract the virus, but also this lateral flow testing, being able to do it at scale, at pace, so that when you do have upticks of the virus, we can come down on it like a ton of bricks and make sure, and it's only one part of the strategic jigsaw, if you like, but make sure we can come down on it like a ton of bricks. As I said, there's a range of measures, but testing and rapid lateral flow testing is a key part of that.
And Minister, again, slightly away from your brief, but I'm sure it's something that you will have a view on. We keep hearing, in terms of the quarantine hotel scheme, we keep hearing that passengers from red list countries are on the plane, once they arrive in the airport, all the way, in fact, to the border checks, are being allowed to mingle with passengers from non-red list countries. What are we going to do to sort that out?
Well, we've got a series of measures in place already. You have to have a COVID test to get on a flight. In relation to those coming from the red list countries, obviously, if they're Brits, we've got to get them safely back home. And what we've devised is the most safe and effective mechanism that we can. We know that the numbers of people travelling have come right down. We have the hotels and the hotel capacity to make sure that they can then quarantine at home for 10 days, sorry, not at home, at a government commissioned hotel in safer conditions. It's only one of the lines of defence. And obviously we're struggling with this balance as we have right the way through, and we're striking the right balance between robust measures to safeguard the vaccine from coming in, but also looking after British nationals who we need to cater for and take care of. We think we've got the right balance. I think the system is working reasonably well, but as I said, it's only one of the safeguards, only one of the lines of defence to prevent either variations from the vaccine or people unwittingly carrying the vaccine coming back into the UK at this critical moment.